Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Dharma live stream with our favorite resident monk, Ayyā Somā. So hello to everyone who's joining in so far. So hello, Jens, Elaine, Catalina, and the other dozen or so people who are watching but not typing. So welcome, everyone. This evening we have Ayyā Somā, who will be leading us in chanting and meditation, and then giving a Dhamma talk about compassionate boundaries. So please, let's all give her our full attention, and you're welcome to type in questions at any time, and we'll answer them at the end of the talk. Please try to keep questions on topic, related to the topic. Any off-topic questions you can ask tomorrow evening during the monk chat. So once again, we'll start with chanting the Ratana Sutta, which you can find via the link at the top of the live chat. So hello, Yusuf and Geetika, and we can all join in chanting the Ratana Sutta.
All right, thank you, Bhante, and thank you, friends, for joining us this evening. As Bhante mentioned, we will start with chanting, and then we will have a period of meditation, and then we'll share some words of Dhamma and have hopefully a discussion after that. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yani da Bhutani samagatani Bhummani vayani vantareke Sabeva Bhuta sumana bhavantu atopi sakacha sunantu vasitam Tasmahi Bhutani sameta sabe metam karota manusiya pajaya Devacharato chaharanti evaling tasmahi nerakata apamata Yang kinchivitang itavahurang vasage suvayang ratanang panitang Nano samangati tathagatena idampi buddhe ratanang panitang Etena sachena suvati hotu Kayam niragang amatang panitang yadachaga sakyamuni samahito Natena dhammena samati kinchi edampi dhamme ratanang panitang Etena sachena suvati hotu Yang buddha seto parivandayi suching samadhimanan tarikanyamahu Samadhinatena samona vijjati dampi dhamme ratanang panitang Etena sachena suvati hotu Ye bhungala tasatang pasatha chatari etani yugani honti Te dakineya sugata sasavaka ete sudinnani mahapalani Yedampi sanghe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu Ye supayuta manasa dalhena nikamino gotamasa sanamhi Te bhati bhata matam vigaiha ladha mutanim buddhim punjamana
Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu yatinna kilo pataving sito siya chatu vivate via sampakampiyo tatu pamang sampurisang vadami yo ariya sachani avecha pasati Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Ye ariya sachani vipavayanti kampira panyena sudesitani Kinchapi te hundi pusapamata nate bhavangatamanga diyanti Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Sahava sadasana sampadaya taya suthamma jahita bhavanti Sakaya dete vichike chitancha silabatam vapi yadati kinchi Chatuhapaye hichavipamuto chachabhitanani abhambo katum Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Kinchapi sokam karoti papakam kayena vacha udaceta Avambo soda sapate chadaya Abhata ditapada sabuta Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Vanapagumbe yata pusitage gimhanamase patamasmin gimhe Tatupamam dhammavarangade saidhimvanagaming paramangitaya Idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Varo varanyu varado varaharo anuttaro dhammavarangade saidhimvanagaming Idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Kinam puranam navam nati sambhavam virata chitta yatike bhavasmin Te kina bija virulhin chanda nimmanti kirayatayam paripo Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena subati hotu Yani dabhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantalike Tathagatam devam manusapujitam buddham namasama subati hotu Yani dabhutani samagatani bummani vayani vahantaleke Tathagatam deva manusapujitam dhammam namasama subati hotu Yani dabhutani samagatani bummani vayani vahantaleke Tathagatam deva manusapujitam sangham namasama subati hotu Etena sacha vanjena dukhavu pasamentu te Etena sacha vanjena bhayavu pasamentu te Etena sacha vanjena rogavu pasamentu te
can get in a comfortable position. We can rock our body side to side. Perhaps rocking the camera side to side. And we can close our eyes and take a few deep breaths. Relaxing into our posture. Releasing any tension we might find in the body. From the top of the head to the tip of the toes. We can breathe out stress and tension. And we can breathe in calm and peace. And as our mind and body becomes more tranquil, we can lift our attention to the tip of the nose and hold it there, paying attention to every in-breath and out-breath. We don't want to force the breath. We just want to watch the breath in its natural state. If we take short in breaths or out breaths, we acknowledge them being short in breaths and out breaths. If they're long, we acknowledge them being long without wanting them to be anything else than what they are. Looking carefully in every moment at the quality of the breath by the nostrils. What does it feel like? Is it coarse? Is it subtle? Looking with deep curiosity. If thoughts appear in the mind, we can just let them arise and cease on their own, just like clouds appearing in the sky and disappearing from the sky. We don't need to get bothered by them. We don't need to interfere with them. It's just suffering arising and ceasing. And we can go back to the breath. And the more our mind becomes still and calm, the more it becomes happy. And the more the mind becomes happy, the more it becomes easily concentrated. And we can rejoice in this wholesome, blameless happiness, reflecting that is always available to us in every single moment, just by paying attention to our breath that is always with us. And so we can wish for ourselves to always be happy, peaceful, and calm. To be free from suffering, to be free from greed, hatred, and delusion. To attain blissful nibbana. And we can imbue our minds with the same wish for all beings, including ourselves. May we all be happy, healthy, and peaceful. May we be all free from suffering. May we all reach supreme blissful nibbana. posture. Stretch a little bit if you need to. And since we're going to talk about compassion, I just want to make sure that the chickens are okay, free from suffering from the thoughts. Right? And apparently I always get this wrong, so Dante is instructing me about the professional way to put the microphone on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ayyā, for leading us in meditation. And hello to a few more friends checking in. Hello, Jen, Melinda, and Gita. And to all the other people who are watching in. And at this time, we'll go ahead and invite Ayyā to give a Dhamma talk.
All right, thank you, Dante. So we can start by giving an homage to our teacher. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So this evening talk, the subject is compassionate boundaries, which for some reason sounds a little bit at first like an oxymoron. Compassion and boundaries. How can they coexist at the same time? And especially if we take some of the most famous Buddhist teachings, sometimes there can be a bit of a confusion on how to sort of put boundaries, or what does boundaries, do we need to even have boundaries to begin with? So I would like to start by actually quoting one of the most famous passages of the Pali Canon, which is the Simile of the Saw, where the Buddha gives precise instructions on how to deal with what kind of mind should we cultivate when dealing with difficulties, with strong things happening to us. And in Majjhima Nikaya 21, the Buddha says, even if bandits were to sever, I got it right, thank you, Bhante. Sever you savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw. He who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. Herein you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall abide pervading them with a mind imbued with loving kindness and starting with them. We shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train. Very beautiful. Lots of Dhamma Sukha whenever I read these words of the Buddha. But sometimes these teachings can be a little bit misunderstood in the way that we take them as the antithesis of boundaries. And in one sense, that is true. The Buddha actually recommends for us to create a mind without boundaries. To the extent that even no matter what people are doing to us, that mind is strong, full of wholesomeness, dwelling with thoughts of compassion, of loving kindness. Yet the Buddha does not say, for example, to go and look for situations where people are going to actively sew your limbs to pieces, right? It's more when that happens, this is the mind that we're keeping. It's not we are going actively seeking for people to sew all our limbs off. So, thank you. Bhakti is my Buddhist teacher, but also my English teacher. So apparently is the act of sewing robes. Thank you for the tips. So first of all, we're not actively doing that. And at the same time, we're not actively staying in a situation where we are harmed. So when we practice the Buddhist teachings, it's very important to understand the subtle differences that we can encounter when in the application of the teachings. So for example, there's a sort of what Pema Children calls idiot compassion. So putting ourselves in a situation that is actually the near enemy of compassion. So compassion that is not supported by wisdom, is not supported by a strong mind, but rather creates the conditions for others to commit unwholesome actions. So to get back to the simile of the saw, for example, it's actively going into a situation where other people can harm us, hence continue indulging in bad and unwholesome actions while we think we're practicing compassion. Is that actually effectively an act of compassion if we are actively putting people in the position to act unskillfully? Is it compassionate for anyone in that situation? Is it compassion for the perpetrator? Is it compassionate towards us who are being harmed in one shape or form? So what I really like about the wording, the choice of words that Pema Chodron specifically picked, idiot compassion, is that it nails really the problem there, which is basically ignorance and delusion and lack of understanding of ourselves, of the situation, and of others, and of ultimately the Dhamma. And so it becomes idiot because it's not actually practicing the Buddhist teachings. It's not really caring for any one of the people or the beings involved. So when we see, for example, how the Buddha taught to different people, it's not that he had a sort of copy and paste attitude. Sometimes we have this idea that spiritual teachers will only speak like this and be very holy and very sweet and very gentle and never say anything that upsets anyone, no matter what. And actually, the Buddha sometimes tells people quite unpleasant things within the Pali Canon. Gets also strong reactions sometimes from people. So what is the difference between common people and the Buddha? Is that the Buddha always knows what is the appropriate response in every single circumstance. He understands the difference of when it's appropriate to use a more sort of forceful, direct approach. And he knows when to take a more subtle, more kind of indirect, perhaps, approach, depending on the circumstances, depending on the individual or individuals that he has in front of them. So it's not a one size fits all, which is what kind of like makes us a little bit confused here and there. We like the one size fits all. We like the sort of commandments. Okay, you should always be direct, or you should always be indirect, or you should always be very sweet and honey, full of honey, or you should be always forceful. Or perhaps we don't even like commandments, but we think that however we were brought up with our cultural conditioning, that's the right way to do things. And none of these are actually motivated by anything except self-centeredness. And the Buddha instead offers us a different approach, which is motivated by loving kindness, by compassion, and by wisdom, which is quite difficult to achieve, but not impossible. And so I picked two passages from the suttas where there's a bit of a description of how the Buddha is compassionate that I thought could be helpful this evening. So in the Deva Samyutta, the Buddha is described as the Tathagata, the enlightened one, full of compassion for all beings. For him, there are no transgressions. For him, there is no going astray. He has not fallen into confusion. I'll repeat that. He has not fallen into confusion. And he is the wise one, ever mindful. That's a Dhammasukha. So it's not that the Buddha is like, oh, I don't know, that person is a little bit annoying, but at the same time, I really want to be like kind to them, and I don't know, they've been abusive to me in the past. Is it appropriate for me to like take a break, or should I like keep hanging out with them because nobody really wants to hang out with them? So lots of confusion, right? All the time. Like, oh, I don't know, I don't really know. Let me call my friend, and let me call my mother, and let me call my father, let me call my sister, and let me call my brother, and let me call that stranger, and let me call, like, we can do the whole address book. And each person will have a different sort of opinion. Stop talking to them altogether, or keep taking care of them, do neither, do both, lots of confusion. So the Buddha doesn't even fall into confusion. And he's the wise one, ever mindful, full of compassion for all beings. In Samyutta Nikaya 10.2, there is the Yaka Sakanamaka that approaches the Buddha and says, having abandoned all the knots as one fully released, it isn't good for you, an ascetic, to be instructing others. So in other ways, he says, if you're unattached, you shouldn't be like going and getting involved with other people and instructing them. And the Buddha replies, if, O Saka, for some reason intimacy with anyone should arise, the wise man ought not to steer his mind with compassion towards such a person. Very strong statement, also very surprising. How can like someone full of compassion utter such a statement? But then he proceeds and says, but if, with a mind clear and pure, he gives instructions to others, he does not become fettered by his compassion and sympathy, which I also find extremely beautiful. So fundamentally, my interpretation of this verse is that the Buddha makes a clear distinction in how to approach compassion with wisdom. And when we have attachment, any type of attachment, so by intimacy, I assume that he implies a sort of quote unquote caring for others that is tainted, that is self-absorbed, that is marked with craving and clinging and attachment fundamentally. But when we clear all of that junk away, we have a pure compassion, a strong compassion. But when, on the other hand, it's tainted, then of course confusion arises. Of course, we won't be quite effective in our actions. Our actions cannot be that beneficial or really good for the welfare of ourselves or others. But when our mind is strong, clear, pure, then that creates the conditions for us to be really helpful, really understand other people's suffering, understand that it's no different than our suffering, and really be capable of instructing them, of helping them out. And so it's this unshakable mind that it seems to me the Buddha encourages us to develop, to strengthen. And what Pema Chodron tries to fundamentally aim at with the flip side of idiot compassion, so our current state of confusion, of not quite knowing and really knowing what to do. And what I really like, and I'll share now a quote from her, is the clear distinction that she makes between compassion, being compassionate towards others, and enabling them. And she says, it's the general tendency to give people what they want because you can't bear to see them suffering. Basically, you're not giving them what they need. You're trying to get away from your feeling of, I can't bear to see them suffering. In other words, you're doing it for yourself. You're not really doing it for them. Sounds familiar? Unhealthy relationships where we're enabling the person to once again perhaps acting unskillfully and harming themselves and others, and us not creating healthy boundaries in order for them to recollect, have the opportunity to look at themselves, look at their unskillful behavior and alter it, and also creating a safe sort of environment for ourselves to watch our mind, look clearly at our intentions, and remove the seed of self-obsession. And so I really like when she talks about not being able to bear to see people suffering, which a lot of times is what we think in terms of compassion. We think that by seeing, for example, the tragedies of the world and crying or feeling extremely upset, that we're being compassionate. But in reality, actually, we're throwing another layer of suffering on top of the suffering. When one explores the sort of the stories and the mind states of extremely compassionate beings who have dealt or deal in these days as well with people in so much suffering, there is a strength of mind. For example, someone like Mother Teresa working in Calcutta and helping people over and over again when surrounded by endless amount of suffering requires an incredible strength of mind, incredible compassion When I went to India the first time, I could barely handle seeing so much suffering of basic human necessities being people without basic things like food, for example, extreme hunger. Could barely see it for a few weeks, let alone dedicate my entire life dealing with that over and over again. So the reaction of the uninstructed worldling that I was back then, and I still am, but at least now I'm an instructed worldling. Back then, I was just an uninstructed worldling. So the only thing I was capable of doing was just crying. I couldn't bear. And someone doesn't even have to be Buddhist. Like Mother Teresa was not Buddhist, but had cultivated such a strong presence of mind to be there and do something about it skillfully, beneficially. So it's a nice reflection to see really what are the motivations that lead us in what we think is beneficial for others. Is it really motivated? Is our intention really pure? Is our intention to really work for the suffering, to relieve the suffering of others? Or is it because we want to overcome that sense of discomfort of seeing them struggle, of not being capable even of helping them? And so that requires a certain self-reflection, a deep understanding of our mind, of our intentions, and really looking at the fact that we tend to think only of sort of greedy person, narcissistic person, people as full of themselves. But sometimes the flip side can be true as well. Sometimes when we practice in a way that we think is compassionate, but in reality is not a compassion that is present with wisdom, we're just doing it out of self-centeredness, out of craving to feel perhaps good about ourselves, perhaps to put meaning in our lives. I am the one who has helped this person. I'm the only one who's bearing the situation. But we want to get to that stage where we are just like we relate to our hands. You know, like perhaps I'm right-handed, so perhaps I use my right hand more than I use my left hand. But I wouldn't chop off my left hand, just like I wouldn't chop my right hand. So caring about both individuals at the same time. Not thinking that by only focusing on the left hand, we're doing okay. No, we're overlooking the right hand. And if we're too obsessed with the right hand, we're overlooking the left hand. So the whole martyr syndrome, for example, that we like to use in order to sometimes feel good or rationalize our actions, the Buddhist perspective is actually that it's just as unwholesome as us being outwardly self-centered. We're still hurting a being. So in every situation, it's important to really look at what are the effects, what are the causes and conditions. Is this sort of situation that we have bringing wholesome results, or is it leading to the unwholesome? How is our mind? What is our mind feeling like? Is it going towards the wholesome, or is it going towards the unwholesome? And if it's going towards the unwholesome, if there is more suffering, if suffering is increasing, it's delusional to think that we are helping others. It's more realistic to acknowledge that just as greed, hatred, and delusion is arising more prominently in our minds, we're creating the conditions for the other person to also have greed, hatred, and delusion arising in their mind. And that's when we have to get in the real uncomfortable territory of setting boundaries out of compassion, not out of pure self-obsession, self-preservation, or self-interest, but rather in the interest of all the people, all the beings involved in the relationship, while cultivating a strong mind of wisdom, unshakable, which then truly, when exposed to no matter what unwholesome actions, unwholesome words, unwholesome anything, can be strong, can be unaffected, can only produce metta, mudita, upekkha, karuna. And in that way, we can actually say that we're practicing compassion. We're following the footsteps of the Buddha, who compassionately created lots of different rules for us monastics to follow. Instead of telling us, oh yeah, do whatever you want, go for it. They were very naughty, the Buddhist monks at the time of the Buddha, doing all sorts of crazy things. So, probably they would have had a better reaction had the Buddha said, oh yeah, do whatever you want. Yes, yes. Go get married, have children, have whatever you want. But out of compassion, yeah, drink, party, live la vida loca. But instead, out of compassion, he gave us precepts to work on, to really create compassionate boundaries that would create the conditions for us to look at the mind. We were talking about the other day about the precept of not eating after noon. A lot of times, for people who are new to practice, they think, well, that's a really arbitrary rule. How weird. Is there something wrong with eating? There's nothing morally wrong with eating. But it's actually a precept. It's an incredibly compassionate precept that creates boundaries for us to not eat and gorge ourselves with food, which is the quickest, fast, sensual pleasure, always or relatively often available, more readily available, especially these days with that there is not that much lack of food in this country. So how incredibly compassionate is that the Buddha thought to give us the opportunity to look at our mind, observe our mind, see how much craving there can be with something so, intangible like food, and eventually transcend our obsession with food, transcend our craving for food, So I think that's all I have for tonight. I hope it was useful in one shape or form. And if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, feel free to type them in the live chat. You can also say, you completely disagree, this is nonsense, so you don't know what you're talking about. I am unenlightened, disclaimer. So, and I'm still working on it myself. So we'll see.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, thank you, Ayyā. So yes, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in. In the meantime, hello, John and Adriana. Welcome. So there's no questions yet. Hello, Michael. So if no questions appear in the next few seconds, then that might be it for this evening. Yen says, thank you, Ayyā. I don't disagree. Michael asks, can you talk about compassionate boundaries with news consumption?
Compassionate boundaries with news consumption. Well, that's kind of easy, actually. Instead of targeting just news consumption, just target your access to the internet. Simply, you can only have access to the internet from this hour to this hour. Phone, computer, anything. If you have a relatively big house, put it in the place where store the technology the furthest away from you. And you know that only at that time you can have access to it. That will reduce automatically your consumption of news. You don't actually have to do it. It's just that you will have so much less time to spend, to waste time actually on technology in general, that then your consumption of news will be just about right. So, for example, right now, I just know that Kamala Harris has been nominated as vice president, and that's it, because that's all I had time to read about this week. Last month, where we were a little bit more lenient with our internal guidelines, because we were still in pandemic or sort of mode where we were doing live streams twice a day, etc., etc. Was it last month? I don't even remember. 2020 now, it feels like a month and feels like 10 years at the same time. So I'm not quite sure. But anyway, when that was the case, interestingly enough, I was very much aware of what was happening, not only in the United States, but also in Italy, and also like across the globe. Lots of time to absorb so many different things. And my mind was going in so many unwholesome directions. So I would say that I personally think that it's good to have an awareness of what is going on. But it's a little bit different than delving too deeply into many things. That just kind of creates the condition, at least for a practitioner, to just dwell in a lot of unwholesomeness, especially because the news are pretty much filled, like 99% of bad news. Hardly are any good news reported. So yeah, do that. Create some limitations, and then those limitations naturally create the conditions for wholesomeness to happen. It's renunciation, fundamentally. That's the core of it. Letting go is a kind of sweeter. People like it better than renunciation, but that's basically what it is. It's the joy of missing out. JOMO.
Okay, and Yusef asks, how can I recognize a wholesome and real compassion?
Does it feel good? Is it beneficial? Like, what's your mind? Is suffering increasing or decreasing? So compassionate mind, the few times where, but still better than nothing, where I would say that my mind was purely compassionate. And it happened, actually, I'll tell the story. Last summer, not this summer, the one before, I was going on alms rounds with the Bhikkhuni in Union Square, and at a certain point, this man came and was really upset. He was not happy to see women in robes, and Bhante Sudaza wasn't there to give us the sort of the stamp of approval of a bhikkhu. So it was just the two of us, and the man got upset. First, asked us a few questions to make sure that it was what he thought we were, and then started yelling at us in the middle of the square, fake monks, and a bunch of profanities of some sort. And it was really interesting because normally I'm an aversive type, so normally when verbally attacked in that way, I would have had two reactions, which is at best felt sorry for myself, like, oh, poor me, I don't deserve this, what have I done? I'm like, have pronounced things, and this is poor me, my destiny. Or the thing would be to fight back and go like, oh, how dare he? Well, you're a fake Buddhist. What kind of Buddhist insults monastic? Go away. But surprisingly, or unsurprisingly actually, because I'm very committed to the Buddhist teachings, out of 10 actions that I do completely wrong, I guess, the Dhamma, sometimes the conditions are right and my mind actually does practice in accordance to Dhamma. And that was one of the cases where my mind did not veer in any of those directions, but rather empathized with the man. So in that moment, first of all, because he was so angry, my first thought was, wow, he's going through a lot of suffering. Wow, it must be really unpleasant to be with such a mind. And the other sort of, and it wasn't really rational, it was more instinctive. The other realization I had was this person was born Buddhist and had, kind of raised with a sort of idea of who was supposed to don these robes, had a very clear idea of like, only this is true, everything else is wrong. So was clinging on this sort of idea, but out of a wholesome intention, because he knew that the Dhamma was sacred. He knew that the Buddhist teachings were profound. There was a lot of respect and care and wholesomeness in the misguided action that he was doing. So it wasn't that his motivation was to attack me. He hadn't met me before. We had never had any interaction in terms of individuals before that in this lifetime, anyway. But I was representing a threat to something so precious as the Dhamma. So in that, I started trembling together with him, because I can recognize how I also feel that this path, these teachings are precious, that I care about them, and how if I saw anything threatening to them, that would create some distress in me, and I would try my best to protect them. And the other realization was karma, that right now I was sort of on the part of the abused and he was the abuser. But there was this sort of understanding that this was not the first time that we had met. And that most likely in the past, it was the other way around. And I was the other person yelling at him, or her, or they, who knows what gender they have. And because we kept on, interacting this way, who knows, for countless lives, in that moment, because I didn't react in the usual way, I broke the cycle. And so all that my mind was able to produce in that way was to wish him to be happy and peaceful and to attain awakening. And I left because I thought it wouldn't be good. Would it be still distressing for the man to see me there? And probably I would be, putting myself in danger, perhaps, if his anger escalated and perhaps he wanted to do something physical. Who knows? So I left. But my mind in all of this was pure. There was no anger. There was no... Even when I felt sorry for him, it wasn't pity. It was just, oh, I know what that feels like. I have also experienced an angry mind, the unpleasantness of all of that. And so the wish for him to be happy was really honest, true. It really came spontaneously. And my mind was very strong. It was very much like actually the description of the scenery of the song. Very rare times that I was able to practice correctly. But it was beautiful. It would actually strengthen my faith also in the triple gem even more. Because whenever we practice in accordance to what the Buddha says, there is no suffering in the mind, regardless of external conditions. There is only compassion. There is only wholesomeness. And so you see, does that, even just talking about it right now, brings peace, serenity in the mind. Why would we not practice that way? So I know that is appropriate. But it's also appropriate to create boundaries. As I said, I wasn't there and I was like, okay, yes, walk on my entire body and please lynch me and stone me. No, that's bizarre. That's completely makes no sense, does it? That would have not been compassionate towards anyone, myself or him, allowing him to make more bad karma. So that's how, by reflecting, really looking at your mind, analyzing your mind, then you can know by yourself. There's no one who needs to tell you, yes, that's right and that's wrong.
Okay, and we have two more questions. So Elaine says, many people told me to put my dog down a year and a half ago. While it has broken my heart to see him seize and cough and vomit, I have honored his life, and by doing so, extended it some 10 years in dog terms.
Oh.
So putting him down was helping whom? I have, by the way, given him the medical treatment recommended. Don't want to create the impression I've left the poor guy to fend for himself.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yeah, there is this practice here in this country of putting down animals when they are severely ill. And I'm not a veterinarian, so I'm not qualified to speak in that regard. But, we also have also deal here with an animal who's not in perfect health, quite the opposite, Stan the cat. And similarly to you, I just try to do my best. So I think the key is trying to do our best in each situation. What is the most compassionate thing to do? And being there with the sentient being, rejoicing when they're, in better health, and trying not to get too upset when they're not. Stan has this thing of clawing himself, sometimes severely. Like once I thought he had removed his eye, as bad as it was. it got really swollen. So cultivating that patience and endurance and caring and care. And my personal way of dealing with this is that, and it was also as a lay person, is that how would I act if it were a human being? Would I put them down or not? Well, with human beings, we don't even have the option. So that kind of creates a bit of a question. Once again, I'm not a veterinarian, so I'm not the best person in terms of saying this is the right course or these are the treatments. I would say, yeah, do your best. It's great that you've allowed the being to, your dog to live. Hardly any living being, even when very sick, wants to die, really. So yeah. And I seem to understand that actually animals, when they're ready to leave, they kind of do it on their own. Apparently cats disappear, for example. You can't find them anymore on purpose. So they hide in a place waiting for death. So until he'll do that, I'll take care of him.
Okay, and last question. John asks, as practitioners, to what extent should we dedicate our time to actively and directly helping others? And how should this be done?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
To what extent should we dedicate our time to actively and directly helping others? And how should this be done?
A lot. A lot of time. And how should it be done? Actually investigate your mind and see where is your weakest link, so to speak. So, giving, which is another form of letting go, of renunciation, dana, is done in so many different ways. So there's not like once again a one size fits all, I would say, but rather it's both doing what naturally comes, what spontaneously comes, and cultivating that and at the same time challenging where is your sort of weakness. So for example, if you have, it comes really naturally, for example, to offer food to people, but it comes very difficult to offer money to people, then keep on offering food and force yourself to give money. And vice versa. If it really comes easy to, put a stash of money there, but very difficult to actually sit down and think, oh, what would this person really need? What could be something that is not, just as simple as writing a check and just giving it to them. Then still keep giving money, but also actively work and do that. I still remember actually that Bhikkhu Bodhi, he made a huge impression in my mind several years ago when he was talking about dana and, for example, with money specifically. And he was like, well, we should always try to do a little bit, push our boundaries a little bit more. So if you want to give 100, so look, you want to give 100, give 105. And then next time give 110, 150, always pushing yourself, with in your discomfort level. You always want to be a little bit uncomfortable in order to push the boundaries. And that's where, you get to when you give a little bit, you get a little bit of peace, to quote Ajahn Chah. When you give a lot, you get a lot of peace. And when you give completely, you get complete peace. But it has to be a practice. So in terms of time, there's never, I would say, the Buddha never said, okay, so you have to give practice giving for 8 hours a week in this particular mode and factor, and then from this other time to this other time, like 3 hours, you do anapanasati, then 2.5 hours contemplation of death. No, he didn't say that. He was like a sort of brush strokes, an idea of what needs to be cultivated, an idea of what the path is, and we need to understand where are we. Actually, to quote my preceptor, we have the map. This is where the Buddha tells us where we need to go, and we need to figure out where are we here. Are we here? Are we here? Are we here? Are we here? And from there, understand what we need to cultivate. So that's, of course, giving is central. Taking care of others is central. It's also actually the reason why we take these vows as monastics. And this, ironically, I learned from lay people of Asian Buddhist, born Buddhist. It was kind of interesting. At the very beginning, I was understanding it, but up to a certain point. But actually, being in entire, like all our livelihood being met by lay people, being entirely supported by the generosity of others, and by others, non-ordained people, is the way through which monastics practice generosity. We give the opportunity for people to constantly practice generosity. And we give the opportunity to ourselves to practice letting go of preferences, letting go of self-importance, of letting go of the idea that we're independent. This was the biggest one for me. It still is. Very difficult to actually acknowledge that we're interdependent, that everything in life is entirely supported by others. It has always been that way, you know. So when I was a lay person, it's just that it's easier to put up the sort of mask of delusion and go like, I'm an independent woman. I want that. I'll buy it. I can get it. You know? So it's, it's such profound teachings. That's another actually example of compassionate boundaries that the Buddha gave us, monastics and lay people, that are embedded within the practice. So we always have the opportunity to become more kind, become more compassionate, become just better beings, prime the mind towards awakening.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ayyā, for the talk and for your answers to the questions. And thank you, everyone, for participating. So please join in tomorrow morning for Sutta study and tomorrow evening for monk chat, your opportunity to ask all the things you've ever wanted to ask of a group of Buddhist monks. And we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.